Welcome to Economic Development Breakout. Title here is TechHire, and we're going to tell you more about the specific initiative, TechHire. But I thought first it might be good to just do some introductions and just generally have a sense of like why I think this is such an important discussion. I think that Code for America getting into economic development and particularly getting into the skills gap or whatever you want to call that set of barriers that's sort of stopping people from really making the most of their talent and their passion and their energy and their curiosity and really translating that into a better path, higher earnings and the like. Because the work that this organization has done to strengthen the capacity of civic organizations, of governments, that to pursue collective action more powerfully is an absolutely essential part of this picture. Because there's two truths that you have to reconcile. The first is that the information, not to mention the hiring power, sits with employers. And as markets change quickly and as technology requirements change quickly, there's just no way that government and higher ed and everyone can kind of keep up with all of that in real time. That information has got to be coming from employers, it's got to be coming from the job market, and we've got to find some way to sort of pull that together. So that's one truth. The second truth, though, is that employers do not have the incentives to hire people, especially people who might be promising, but who haven't done the job before, who you'd have to train, who you have to take a risk on. Like in a world where, you can kind of, you have better and better tools of actually finding someone who's already done the job, right? It's just at a transactional level, the employer incentive is often going to be to poach rather than train. And when you invest in someone's human capital, you invest in their skills, you also increase their negotiating power, right, vis-a-vis you. They can ask for a higher salary, they can go someplace else, which is exactly why it's so beneficial to the economy and to society, right, but it's why employers will underinvest in it. So you have this situation where, the knowledge and the action is with employers, but the incentives are not there to invest in human capital. And then you have the public sector and higher education where the incentives are there. They're made for collective action, but they don't have access to the information. They don't have the pace. They can't sort of integrate it at that pace. And so that's what's falling between the cracks. And if you think about what Code for America does and what the civic tech movement does, I just think this is a really perfect opportunity to make a difference in what is probably the most important single factor in someone's economic opportunity, and that is what kind of job and career path they can have. So that's why I'm excited about it. I'll say I'm Byron O'Geist. Right now I'm Managing Director of Opportunity at Work, which is a social venture that we started a few months ago. Our goal is really to help bring into being an operating system for the labor market. And for those of you in the tech world, I hear there's a few of you here, the really difficult coordination problems are rarely solved by lots of meetings, right? Meetings are necessary, but not sufficient to solve these problems. You need to have an efficient way, a low transaction cost way for all the parties to be able to engage sort of in their native language, right? In the context of an operating system and APIs, right? There's developer toolkits for developers. There's a very simple interface for consumers. It matches to the hardware and the like. So in the labor market, this is a metaphor, but I think a powerful one for what actually needs doing to solve this problem. So we'll get back to that. The first initiative of Opportunity at Work is the TechHire initiative. We've decided that the point of entry that would be most powerful is information technology occupations across industries, not just the tech industry, and to do so with a critical mass within local or regional labor markets, so that you actually have employers who need to fill these roles actually taking the step of expanding their hiring, and particularly doing it based just on skills and competencies, not on degrees and work history and all of that stuff. Give people a chance to show what they can do. That's the heart of it. And we think that can be catalytic. So we'll talk more about that. But we have with us here 3 leaders of TechHire. All 3 of them, of course, have been playing critical roles in their institutions that have been working in this field since before TechHire was launched in March with President Obama's announcement at the National League of Cities. They're going to share more about how this works in practice. So starting at the end, we have Steve Yadzinski, who's the Chief Technology Officer of Innovate Plus Educate, which is a nonprofit, a social enterprise that's been doing great work in this sphere based out of Albuquerque. Steve's role includes the overall organizational strategy, forging partnerships, which are a critical part, and developing and implementing technology solutions for initiatives like Talent Albuquerque, which is a citywide skills-based hiring platform, and now TechHire in both Albuquerque and Salt Lake City. In the middle here, we have Mindy Aronoff, who's the Director of Training at BAVAC. BAVAC is the lead training institution for TechSF, which is TechHire affiliate across the Bay in San Francisco. And I should add, one of the great examples of job-driven, demand-driven kind of training that sort of pre-exists this latest wave, and really an example for all of us. BAVAC is the nation's largest nonprofit media arts center, and it does digital media training for incumbent and dislocated workers, for youth from difficult environments, and also for teachers, which is, I think, a very important contribution. And then we have Sandy Hoff, who's the leader of TechHire in Nashville, and who leads all the education programs for the Nashville Technology Council, which is an economic development agency very much driven by business and employers that's dedicated to developing and connecting and promoting the technology community in its broadest definition in Middle Tennessee. And so before we go further, I'd love to get a sense just of, in the room, like just where you all are coming from. Like how many people in the room work for government, like municipal government in some way? Great. And okay, of those of you who are in government, how many of you would consider yourself, I'm going to give you policymakers, technologists, or other? How many of them would you consider yourselves policymakers? Okay. How many technologists? It's good. There was no rule against voting twice. Well done, well played. And how other? Are there other someone? Okay, what do you do?
Business development.
Business development. So you're business development for a city.
Yeah.
That's excellent. So that's like partnerships and
Partnerships, foreign direct investment.
Interesting. Okay.
We need a regional partnership of 4 workforce investment boards, capacity building,
Got it. So policymakers, technologists, and partnerships are sort of the big. That's great. Those are the perfect ones. How many people here are entrepreneurs or from companies, like private sector companies? Great. And how many are, none of those would consider themselves, brigade members, civic hackers, like, what? Okay? All right. Okay, some people doubling up there too, which is good. That's good. You gotta have some way to fund this whole thing, right? Okay, great. So I think we have a pretty good sense then of who's in the room. And with that, I guess I would just say 3 quick things about why. There's a bit of a debate in Washington anyway, and in the academy about the skills gap. Is there a skills gap? Why aren't wages rising if there's a skills gap and the like? And we can talk about that more, but I think what we see is that the skills gap is absolutely real, and it is one of the main things holding people back and our country back from realizing its full economic potential. But it's not really, in a sense, the cause right, of the dysfunctional labor market. It's kind of an effect, right? It's actually an indicator of the way the labor market is dysfunctional, and specifically the real misalignment of incentives, like very poor information, extremely high cost of coordination, in what is, after all, not a spot market for ditch digging, right? It's a market for skills, for human capital. When an employer puts up a job description, they might take 3 weeks debating what should be in it, but the person who gets that job has probably spent 10 years or 15 years of their lives prior to that job description even being created, preparing for that role. So it's a very complicated market, and there's a lot of things about it that lend itself to this lack of coordination. But in many other markets, right, that where you have these kinds of problems, you've seen a mix of technology and new business models radically improve the matching, the efficiency, the coordination in these markets. And we haven't, for the most part, seen it in the job market. Particularly, we haven't seen it at like the lower half or lower third, right, of the workforce in terms of income. So there's a big opportunity there. In IT jobs alone, there are about 700,000 listed open jobs in the country today. There's a much larger number. You don't list a job that you don't think you can fill. So I think there's more to it than that. And the demand going forward is very much outstripping supply. So it's a real thing and a real opportunity. And then secondly, that the combination of employers hiring, opening up hiring channels kind of based on competencies, changing, therefore, meaning that for training or education provider, if you can train someone to get to that standard, no matter what their background is, you got a business model now, right? That's the second piece. And then the third piece is how to take this mix of technology and platforms and business models to turbocharge all of that. Because today, even the best of the training providers who get people into work have to build the whole vertical stack themselves. They have to figure out who could do the training and then go find them. They have to figure out what the curriculum should be and then develop it. They have to figure out who can teach it and then train them to teach it. They have to figure out who the employers are and go recruit the employers. It's as if you wanted to develop an iPhone app, but you have to develop iOS and you have to source components from China too. There'd be a lot fewer great iPhone apps. And so, but that is in fact the situation we're in right now in the job market. So it's not surprising that there are like relatively few terrific training institutions that really prepare people for work. So with that, I'd like to go to Sandy first in terms of what you're seeing on the ground. And so tell us about TechHire Nashville and the kind of community of employers. Why are they doing it? What's exciting about it? What should we know?
Sure. Well, it's surprising to most people to find out that technology is the second largest sector in Nashville, second only to healthcare. Everybody thinks of it as Music City, but even the music industry is so technology driven now, and certainly healthcare is as well. The Nashville Technology Council is actually very similar to a Chamber of Commerce. We have 400 corporate members representing 24,000 technology professionals. And we got into this issue or started, addressing this problem because it was the number one thing that we heard from our members. Every time that we would have a meeting with anybody, the very first thing that they said was talent. We can't find talent. We don't have talent. We're turning away work. We can't grow. We can't fill positions. Everything from, we have 4 positions to fill to we have 140 positions to fill. And so the more that we heard about that, the more that we realized that this was something that was really significant that we needed to get involved with. Currently in Nashville, we have 1,600 IT vacancies that are unable to be filled, which is fairly significant for the size of Nashville. So when we got involved, we looked at this from, of course, our perspective as a community-based economic development agency and tried to look at this as, how can we do this from a community perspective? And it doesn't take long to figure out that really this is one of those problems that it's going to take a village to fix. And so we've approached this problem as being kind of if you think about it as a triangle, you've got students who would be your K through 12 students, and then potential students, your adults that are your potential job seekers further down the road, and then educators, and then the business community. And how can we, from our perspective, be able to effectively make the connections that are needed among those three groups? And so that's our perspective, and everything that we do is coming from it as the connector. How do we connect things more effectively? So as an example, when you're connecting students with business, what does that mean? It means that you're offering internships, you're connecting students to mentors, you're bringing in guest speakers, you're opening up students' eyes to the career pathway. Everything that we do is focused on that pathway and how do we get people on board. With the connection between educators and business, as Byron said, that's a difficult connection because they speak two different languages. And so, but how can we get at that skills need and bring that to the educators in a way so that they understand that they are doing, that their approach needs to be more heavily influenced by workforce development and not just education for education's sake. And then, so that's kind of where we're coming, when we're approaching this work.
And so what are the obstacles to making this successful? Well, how successful do you think it's been so far? What are you proud of? Like, what are you worried about? And what are your barriers?
Well, I think that in terms of what we're proud of, probably the thing that we're most proud of is a platform that we're building that we're considering to be like a technologymatch.com, where it will facilitate the connection process so that students, educators, and the business community can make those connections. So if you think about it from a student or potential student perspective, they'll be able to go into the system, look at what all of the different jobs are in the technology field, take an assessment to see what best meets their, what they have an aptitude for, right? And where they should be trying to build competencies. After they've matched to that job card, they'll be able to go in and look at what training opportunities are out there. How do I get that job? So they'll be able to see people in the community. There's videos, so you can go and click on it and you can see a database administrator at Nissan talking about his job and how he got that job. And then you'll be able to link to what are all the opportunities in town. How do I get this job, right? I can go take courses at the community college. I can go to this boot camp. I can take these online courses. All of that will be in there. And then there's the link to internships and mentor opportunities as well. And then there's the job board. So that's kind of the finish line, right? So that's the thing that we're most proud of right now. And we are launching that on October 14th. And so we're almost hitting that finish line, so we're really excited about that. So that's pretty exciting for us. In terms of obstacles, I think really the biggest obstacle is that language barrier, trying to make those connections and function as a translator, and to be able to see there's such a lack of empathy, if you think about it, when you're connecting industry and educators. They just simply don't see each other's perspective at all. And so trying to bridge that and be that translator is probably our greatest challenge right now.
Thank you. So we'll get to questions after we sort of get everyone into the conversation a little bit. Mindy, you've had a very successful sort of organization for a while. You're sitting, and I hear there's a certain amount of tech going on in San Francisco these days. And so, you're sitting right in the middle of it. You're trying to get, you've got like, bright young things pouring into San Francisco from, all over the country, all over the world. How do you get, low income, maybe not ideally educated person like from the community a chance to get on that rocket ship?
It's really hard. It's really, really hard. In an area, how many people here are from the Bay Area or live here now? So when an employer has so many people to choose from, she doesn't gravitate towards an apprenticeship, for example. It's not so much that we don't have anyone to fill the jobs, even though employers will say that. It's that they want the very best person for the money, and there's 100 people lined up for each job. So when we're trying to help unemployed or underemployed Americans who were in the tech industry, left for one reason or another, maybe they were laid off or their company dissolved or whatever it was, then we give them some fresh skills and put them back out there. We have great connections with employers, and I'll tell you about that in a second. We still have so much competition that it's extremely hard for the people. This is a population that feels like the other, because they are not working in the tech industry right this second. So we spend a lot of time bolstering them, reminding them that they have every right to be part of this huge gold rush, and that they are going to make it, that they're infinitely hireable.
And Mindy, I just want to, I think in the workforce world, people talk about manufacturing a lot, because manufacturing was sort of quintessential kind of middle-class job, middle-skilled, middle-class job, where training could get someone, to a kind of a good place in the labor market. And today we talk a lot about that manufacturing has an image problem, because people think of manufacturing as sort of dirty, backbreaking, whereas it's actually, of course, now very high tech. I mean, the manufacturing that's in the U.S. is like, this is technical, simple programming, so it's very different. But in a funny way, like information technology jobs also have an image problem, and right, that the image people have of those jobs are the image of people working at Google and people working at Facebook, and like the very highest, most narrow kind of end of the spectrum. Because Mindy, you may have discovered a Facebook systems architect, but like most likely your people aren't going to be Facebook systems architects. But what people need to understand is that is a tiny sliver of the technology jobs. I mean, honestly, even in San Francisco, right, where the less visible ones, there's tons of them in banks and retailers and all. They're right. Every company has them. Every industry has them. In the U.S. as a whole, 70% of the technology jobs, information technology, are not in the tech industry. And we've heard about Nashville. So it's keep in mind when you have this image, there are a ton of jobs. And Mindy, I'd love you to talk about what kinds of jobs, what are you training people for, the specifics of that, and what does that path look like?
Well, the tracks that we offer include front end, back end, web development, both of those, project management, motion graphics, graphic and web design, UX design, IT support help desk. Trying to think what else. What have I left out?
It's a pretty good list to start.
Yeah, that's a pretty good list.
And so how does your system work? So you've said it's very competitive out there. You're serving people who aren't starting from, they're starting from a disadvantaged place in terms of their social networks, in terms of their, they don't have a lot of margin for error in their lives. How do you, what's your intake process? How do you decide who you can serve?
We have about 2,000 people that apply for 250 slots, training slots. Each of the people that get chosen have a personal career coach for 1 year. We have about 15 wraparound workshops that include everything from how to nail the phone interview to working with millennials, boomers, and Gen Xers, to what your nonverbal communication says about you. We have a improv class that teaches you how to talk about yourself on the fly. What I've discovered is that computer people, tech people, are mostly introverts, and that's the last thing they want to do is go promoting themselves to people that they think don't want to hire them in the first place. Besides giving them a battery of tech quizzes to see what level they're at, we also insist that they have a LinkedIn profile and have at least 45 to 100 connections coming in. We require that they get up to about 300 connections while they're in the program. If it's a media, arts, or digital media track they're going for, we look at their portfolio and analyze it. We ask them what their career goals are. We have a 30-minute phone screening with everyone. Then about 10 of us get into a room on Fridays, and we talk about who's up for a slot, and we all agree. And then we assign the counselor from there. And that's after they've met all the Department of Labor and WIOA eligibility criteria.
This is worth noting because it connects to this whole civic tech question. Like when you hear stories about the most innovative workforce programs, they'll sound like social entrepreneurs, right? That's what it'll feel like, right? But in fact, quite a significant share of the dollars that are actually funding these initiatives are coming from the public workforce system, right? These are federal dollars that flow down to states and local communities to be deployed, and where they can be deployed with there's actually a tremendous amount of flexibility. There are a lot of rules attached to specific dollars, but in terms of who you serve, but in terms of like how you can deploy it,
yes,
there's actually a tremendous amount of creativity that's possible. But I think it's fair to say there's not always a tremendous amount of creativity exercised. And so this is an area where you have public systems with flexible dollars. They can work with terrific partners, but they typically don't always have the capacity and the creativity, and frankly, just the ability to sort of try things, right? Because in large measure, because of the technology and data infrastructure, it takes a long time to try something new. And so there's a real kind of unlock.
It took a long time for our partner, San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development, to trust us as well. Because as soon as we said, well, we're going to make everybody have a LinkedIn account, for example, they said, oh, you can't do that. And we said, well, if you're not on LinkedIn, you're not going to get a job. So yeah, we can do that. And we were constantly battling.
Right.
We all speak a different language, like you said, but it's government we got to add in there too.
Absolutely.
Industry and community.
Absolutely. With that, I'd love to transition, Steve, to talk a bit about what you've seen. Now, Innovate Plus Educate is playing a central role in TechHire in Albuquerque and in Salt Lake City, but prior to that, you implemented this Talent Albuquerque, this citywide. And it would be great to hear a little bit of the nitty-gritty, first what that is, why it matters, and then particularly as your CTO, like what did it take to enable that technologically, in business processes vis-a-vis government, employers, educators, and the like?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Byron. As we move into TechHire in Albuquerque, that is the third year of funding through a partnership with the City of Albuquerque, who's here today. Thank you, Gary. And what we're able to do is to build on a skills-based hiring program. So we're pushing up into more professional skills, being able to associate the competencies associated with tech jobs in Albuquerque and then connect that to training, not dissimilar from what we've been talking about at the table. Prior to that, we focused on skills-based hiring, which was a process where candidates would take assessments and receive skill scores. And then we had a system where we are scoring every available publicly published job in the Albuquerque MSA so that they can search for jobs based on their skill scores. Along that, with that, we had a partner employer program. So these are our employers of about 120 partner employers over 2 years, and we expect that number to grow through TechHire. Just a few stats here as I go through it, but about 120 partner employers, and that constitutes about 400 partner employer positions that were posted with us over 2 years. One of our strongest partners is the City of Albuquerque, and so much of our longitudinal understanding about what happens to candidates is from information sharing there. And with the city, since our program began, we are, and I actually don't have this number, but I believe it's about 530 candidates placed in positions with the city. So in terms of the tech development, so we have this signal that we get employers to listen for, which is skill scores. If people don't meet or exceed the recommended scores, we connect them to training, skill up opportunities. Very important, no closed doors. But in terms of building the tech, one of the things that happens when you're integrating various systems within a citywide system, and this is true of our work in many of the places we work nationwide, is that you're not in a position where you can displace infrastructure. And so what you have to be able to do is to integrate with existing infrastructure. And what I mean by that is we work very, very closely with the workforce system in Albuquerque. Our offices are actually in a one-stop center. And so what our system does is it sends people directly back into the virtual one-stop system that we have in New Mexico, so that we're giving candidates the opportunity to see positions based on skill scores, think about their skills in a new way, possibly discover opportunities that they wouldn't have thought of before. But we need to be able to coordinate well with our partners.
And I guess the skill score, like I think it's worth like explaining, why does that matter and who does that matter for? I mean, I don't know how many people in this audience have a skill score.
Right.
Do you have a skill score? But like they've got good jobs, they're doing good things. Why does it matter to have a skill score?
Well, the skill score, first of all, we're leveraging the Work Keys assessments in New Mexico, and we've shown great success working with that. And it's often a difficult assessment to talk about, especially for workforce, because it's a clunky system to work with, although it has tremendous validation behind it. So what happens is you're able to take assessments in various areas, mathematics, locating information, business writing, and so forth. And that is representative of competencies that are behind those scores. So when we help an employer understand the core foundational skills associated with a particular position, we're able to match a candidate to that position based on a validated metric of competency. And again, skill transference and understanding that connecting them to training, which is proven to increase their abilities in these areas, has been very successful.
One of the things I think, trying to understand why something like this, this kind of approach can be so helpful. One analogy that I found is helpful is thinking about credit scores. Now today when we talk about credit scores, it's often, they're restricting credit to people. But like if you go back to before you had credit scores, it was very difficult to get consumer credit, right? You needed to be a homeowner, you needed to have been employed like for a long time. There was much less. And what the credit score did, which remember is a pure information product, it made it possible to identify people who you could trust with credit, even though maybe they didn't have as much money, they didn't have, and so it actually, even though it wasn't the credit scoring system, like that didn't extend any credit to anyone, it massively increased the extension of credit. So a skill score doesn't give anyone a skill, but what it does is allow employers who, in order to avoid making a bad hire, may say, well, look, I don't know who can do what, but if you've completed a college degree and these fields are from an institution that I trust, like I will consider you. Everybody else, forget about it, right? So that's the issue. There are 43 million Americans who have gone to college but never completed it. If you look at their earnings, they're much closer to high school graduates than they are to college graduates. It's not just the learning, it's the degree and the signal that imparts. And that's people who already went to some college. So in other words, you have tens of millions of people who don't really have a good way of indicating what it is they can do. So unless they have a contact, a person that trusts them and can vouch for them, right, then they're kind of not going anywhere in the job market. So what this does is to be able to help those people show what they actually are good at and show employers, but also to show themselves what gaps do they need to fill. Oh wow, if I learned this, I could maybe get to that job, right? Because you need to know if I do X to learn Y, I can get to job Z. And if you don't know that, it's very hard to put forth your best effort. You're really stuck. And so these kinds of efforts, which are really, again, they really are information, data, right, tech sort of efforts, can make a huge difference to, right, allowing then providers like Mindy to step in, right, and actually fill that gap. So I think that's worth noting. So with that, I want to maybe throw it open to a discussion, and we'll go back and forth with people. I want to get people into the discussion, but you can also talk among yourselves too as we go. But so, what questions are there out there? Perspectives? Yes. Do you mind saying who you are and what you're? Yeah, low back. Yeah.
My name is Mike Tarkington. I am just a San Francisco Brigade member, hopeful to start my own website, but don't have a tech background, so I'm here to learn about avenues for getting that. I've sort of been teaching myself the basics of coding, but it's a slow road. And I also don't have assurances that what I'm teaching myself is really going to be well appliable. So that's why I'm here. My question is, do you feel that the problem is one of distribution of talent? Because you had talked a little bit about San Francisco being a very competitive market in which maybe there's lots of people out of work who have the necessary skills that may very well go to New Mexico and find a position because there's simply higher demand there. And then there's just that lack of coordination to distribute that talent. Or would you say that there's still demand no matter where you go, and we just need to get everybody on board no matter where they are?
So just want to.
I would like to answer this. I think that if we could tip the country sideways and distribute it, that would be pretty cool. I think the reason that people are all flocking here.
Are you guys taking notes? Because Code for America could figure out how to tip the country sideways.
It's like, I grew up in LA and everybody wanted to work in the movies. Now everybody wants to work for these very famous companies. And so even though there may be a job in Nashville or Albuquerque, the glory of working for Facebook is just so seductive that people are just driving and flying in and boating in by the droves. I think San Francisco grew by 200,000, something like that in the last 18 months. And it's frightening. I live 14 miles from my job, and it takes me 90 minutes to get there.
Can I extend my question?
Sure.
So then is the problem...
But I think you were just about to get an invitation to move to Nashville, so.
So is the problem then that we need to communicate the demand in the rest of the country to those people who think that the only way for them to get into this industry is to work for one of those big companies that are
What's really interesting about all of this is that it's when Byron said that a minute ago, I had never even thought about that because that is so far away from where we are in Nashville, because we have exactly the opposite problem. We can't make tech sexy enough. Like, people aren't thinking about these as cool jobs. And parents aren't thinking about this, and family members aren't thinking about this as cool jobs. They're not thinking about the Facebook and the Google. They're thinking about the weird guy that they knew in college who never came out of the basement of the library. And they're saying, you don't want to do that. You're so good at science. Be a doctor. Be an engineer. Go build a bridge. Don't go build a website. You're not weird. You don't have to do that. And so we're trying to address that issue as well. So we're coming at this from an entirely different perspective of having we have a website that's called IT is the New MD, because for the affluent areas of town, everybody's telling their kids, go be a doctor. And we're like, actually, you can make more money and be in higher demand and wear flip-flops to work if you want to take this other route. So come get on our bus. And so it's really interesting to hear this because it totally makes sense, of course, but I was like, oh yeah, that's right. You have a totally different issue than we do.
But the only other thing I'd add, like if you step back at the macro level, these things are related and they feed on each other. So Robin Carnahan is in the audience. She's on the board of directors of a social venture called LaunchCode, which is based in St. Louis. LaunchCode was born in part out of the frustration of Jim McKelvey, who's the co-founder of Square. Square was actually founded in St. Louis, right? But as Square grew, and as it turned out it had something that could really scale, that the world really needed, it could not get enough talent in St. Louis, right? That the feeling that Jim and Jack's view, and it was pretty factually grounded, there was not enough tech talent in St. Louis to sustain the growth of Square. Hence they move out to the Bay Area. And Jim's very civically involved in St. Louis, and it's a very frustrating thing to have to move this thing you created to a different place. But like, why is all the talent in Bay Area? It's because it's all kind of rushing to the Bay, right? So there you get this sort of effects, but the need, right? Creativity is distributed everywhere in the country, right? Energy, passion, and by the way, like people who have different life experience understand different market needs, right? So there's a lot of value in that. So part of the question is, how do you get the flywheel spinning in the other way, right? How do you actually get more people into this pipeline? But keep in mind, you don't just need to, it's not enough to learn how to work in tech. You need to work to learn too. So the key is, how do you get sort of the on-ramps for people to get into that cycle? And that's a critical thing. And a lot of the work that's being done by everyone here, and Robin, please speak to the LaunchCode experience or however you would like, please.
I'd like to throw in two things. One is the Square story that is accurate, but I will also say that last month Square announced that they're going to open an office in St. Louis to tech jobs.
I saw that, that's great.
A good tech job in Square. With respect to LaunchCode, which has been trying to solve the tech talent gap and put people with non-traditional coding backgrounds into apprenticeships and then into full-time jobs, it was very much born from the fact that we feel like we had the talent that would stay in St. Louis. So we launched it there a couple of years ago and really focused on the business community, focused on the demand side of the equation first, to understand what it was they needed, what the talents are, and then went out and found the supply. Say, you interested in this, and then did the assessments from the matching. The conversion rate to full-time hires has been over 90%. That plays hundreds of people moved into Miami just earlier this year, moving into Kansas City, and looking at other cities. So if there are any of you that are active in your other workforce development offices of other cities, or you're interested in all this, please all give me a card. But LaunchCode is sort of cracking up on how to get this to work in a way that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
What we need is partners in those communities.
Absolutely. And I would say, all of these, when you think about it, everything we've been talking about today and all the examples of our panelists have been successful. And in fact, they're strikingly successful in the workforce world. That said, in all cases we've talked about, we're talking about hundreds, not thousands, not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, not millions, which is what we need. And I think that, it's, of course, as anyone who's done a startup knows, like getting the model right for, really right for your first 100, first 200 customers, that is absolutely essential. And we have examples here where we're getting we're in that ballpark. But then how do you scale? And part of the challenges you face is that, well, first of all, there's not a big capital market for nonprofits, right? So there's not sort of money ready to pour in behind scaling. But also, you have, in the case of LaunchCode, LaunchCode's in St. Louis and now launched its home city and then went to Miami. In St. Louis, acquiring employers was basically free, because the leaders of launch code were pillars in the community, and they could just call everyone together and let's go. In Miami, oh no, there's door knocking, right? There's all this, and if you look at it, then you end up with, half of the cost structure in a new city ends up being acquiring, right, employers. And by the way, you have to acquire a critical mass of employers in order to fulfill the promise to job seekers that you'll be able to match. So that's very interesting, because cities bring their employers together all the time to do things. And in fact, these 31 TechHire communities, what they've done on their own is to bring those employers together. And so if you start getting models like this, and indeed others, even from the private sector and the like, that can really deliver, and you have the aggregation that's happening, you can actually change very much the scaling characteristics. There's not a lot of nonprofits, you can count them on one or two hands, that have been able to actually take off and go from the one instance, but we need that in this sphere. And I think the people in this conference in this room can really contribute to that. Yes.
My name is Ian Woodrock. I work in the mayor's office in the city of West Sacramento around ed policy and ed programs. My question's around scalability, credentialing, both from the employer side accepting credentials outside of the workplace, whether it's taking a MOOC or a series of classes for an online credential. So your platform, Stephen, skill score. We've been playing around with different ideas for digital badging, digital credentialing, finding ways to really allow youth and their work-based learning experiences to be credentialed through an online badging mechanism, and having a series of badges that stack upon one another in order for them to have some sort of outside of the classroom learning that's credential that's issued by either an employer, a nonprofit organization, or an affiliated school group, and then have that be accepted by employers. It's kind of an on-ramp to work-based learning your junior or your senior year. And skill score I see as having kind of a parallel functionality. One of the problems we've been facing when it comes to how do you accept this in different parts of the region is you have to have different municipal organizations or different employers accept the same standard and have a way to standardize that across regions. Another thing that's great with digital badging is you can see where in your city people are getting badges and where people aren't getting badges. So a two-part question is, how do you deal with the issues of scale when it comes to having kind of that standardization? If I left New Mexico and moved to the Bay Area, how would you have that skill score translate across jurisdictions? And then also when you're dealing with these kind of issues around analytics, do you have that built into the system so you can see who is getting the highest skill scores over time and who are the lowest skill scores, so you can send resources specifically to those areas to increase the workforce in specific geographies of the city.
So on the first question, in terms of scalability, just to be straight, it's really hard. So there's a lot of direct outreach to employers in the Albuquerque region and all the regions that we work in. We were just in Dallas on a different project, talking to employers about competencies as opposed to a skill score. It's the same, very similar concept. So I think that that's something that we're working to solve in terms of a scalability problem. At the same time, I think that there is a realistic trend towards competency-based hiring, and there is a real business case for it. And so, I sort of joke sometimes that I'm basically involved in a war of attrition, that so long as we just stick with this and keep moving forward, we will finally get to a tipping point where employers will start to be able to recognize one another's systems. If you had, for example, a large employer have a certificate of some kind and you showed that to another large employer in a similar industry, perhaps that would also be cross-transferable. So that's not a complete answer. It's a lot of elbow grease for our work. Basically, our system is self-service tools for the job seekers and outreach and coordination with employers. So a lot of specific touches with employers. On the second question around metrics, I think that that's a fascinating area, and that's actually an area where I spend a lot of time thinking about, we're just coordinating through the mayor's office and also Department of Workforce Solutions on a longitudinal study based on our skill scores over the last 3 years. So we're coordinating with them to leverage W-2 data and some other components so that we can get some real data behind that. And I think that I was actually in some meetings where coordination around how metrics are tracked is a real need. And we're looking forward to making our findings public and shareable. So not only are we looking at things like LinkedIn can do, where we know tech talent is leaving Albuquerque to Denver and Dallas, for example, and that's a bummer. But we can also look at wage data.
Yeah, I'd mentioned just in passing, the fact that you can do that work with the city of Albuquerque, as you said, is because the city of Albuquerque has actually used, the city itself, the city government has actually used the skill scores, has been one of the most important employers that are developing a critical mass around the adoption of it. And I think that's worth mentioning because we're talking mainly about government in its service delivery functions, but government is also a large employer in most places. And I think I'm right to say that government agencies, municipal government, tend to be quite small c conservative in the way they hire. So they're not exactly winning the war for talent, and yet they have a lot of rules, right? Like, you have to have the 4-year degree, like a lot of sort of specific rules that don't allow them typically, don't lend themselves to saying, hey, can someone do this job? Let's start there. Right? So actually the work within city government as an employer to change that can be a huge contributor to moving from what in many, if not most cities, is an aging and pretty homogenous kind of tech workforce, right? That's like on the verge of retirement, many past retirement age, right? And like usher in a kind of a tech workforce that more looks like the new demographics of their city and that has multiple pathways in. So if you say, we don't have time machines, so if you say that if you didn't remember to get a 4-year degree in computer science, you're out of luck, well, then you're out of luck for like 60 years. So we really got to change that paradigm, and I think cities can do it. So last question here. Gary, you're Albuquerque, so why don't you comment on that? It doesn't have to be a question. And then this gentleman, and then I want to do one last round.
So Gary, overall, I'm a director for the city of Albuquerque, and we really appreciate this work. I will tell you that there's a couple of issues, especially scalability. We do still have a paradigm that tech jobs are elsewhere, so as fast as we train, they leave. So we have several employers, including rural RSI, which just moved to Albuquerque, which is expanded there, announced this week, that want more of these IT jobs, and we keep losing them. The interesting part, though, is we've got a little local firm called who made the first point of sale system for restaurants in iPad, and they're just exploding. They just got a $15 million infusion with some folks from DC who are coming in and saying, okay, Gary, I got 40 million dollars. Let me get it. I might have to put it in your mind. Why? Well, I need a marketing person. The marketing person isn't a marketing person like you would be a marketing person. It's somebody who writes specific code to attract the right person to come into the website and pick their product. So I think the very definition of tech job is starting to expand beyond what we can value. And an HR position in that company is much different than one down the street. So I think the definition of an IT job is something we continuously have to look at. But it's really critical that we get this badging in place quickly. We have some job training incentive programs that I can target right to that. This employer will help in these areas. But employers aren't willing to build that on their own. They're moving too fast and they don't have the time or the wherewithal to do that. So we take sort of that for
Yeah, I agree. And that's the tip of the iceberg. If your middle class job is not an IT job today, it probably will be in 5 years. Last comment, and then.
Government operations agencies, we have kind of a paradox of proximity in Sacramento. A lot of our talent is attracted to jobs in San Francisco, in the area. We have a missing built capacity in the state government. So we need to hire some new people. We want them to look like California looks like. But we also have a lot of employees that we want to keep, the dedicated state employees. And just want you have any experience in talking about upskilling existing employees or working with union partners to have some sort of combined effort to upskill employees?
Do you
I don't fully understand what your question is.
I think
Using upskilling existing workforce to take
right.
folks and
Yeah, you're saying, Mindy's serving people who got laid off, right? Maybe whose skills got obsolete and now need to be retrained. Like, could you get them before their skills are obsolete, right? To keep their skills current, right?
your own people that want to stay in government but don't have the skills but could benefit and save.
Because we have to wrap, I just want to say I think that is a huge opportunity, and it's many of the same approaches are relevant. And what's great about it is you're way more likely to retain an employee, right, who's already been with your company, who you kind of upskill and train in this way, than you are to, a new person. So it's actually a higher ROI investment typically. So I just want to wrap with very quickly. I would like you guys to say each, if there's one thing that you think people in this room could do to achieve the kind of scale that we're talking about, or what would it be? Mindy, you want to go first?
Okay. I think that getting the tools training is essential, but also we need to help people learn how to find a job. And if we're not doing that, then they're just going to be rejected over and over and over. It's a proven fact today that you find a job through someone you know. And that's completely different than it used to be in 1970 or 1980. So let's concentrate on helping each other. This is a unique time. I've never seen this when community, government, and industry are all working together so passionately.
Thank you. Steve, what's your one thing?
Yeah, I think the moving to a competency-based hiring and training culture is a culture shift, to use the word twice, and I think that the more that people can be aware of that and talk to people about what that means beyond a degree. I mean, a degree is a badge in an essence, but it's supposed to represent competencies, but to elevate that awareness, especially if you're in a position of hiring or influencing those decisions around individuals, so that you can have a broader, higher quality set of candidates.
Great. And Sandy?
I'll go with the other side of things. Kind of a think big, but start small. Talk about your job to everybody. Talk about why you like your job. Tell people about it. Tell them about what great careers are out there in technology. Talk to businesses, talk to educators. It's going to take everybody to solve this problem, and you can't start out with some giant initiative. You have to start out just individuals talking to people about it.
Great. So my one thing, when I was in the White House, I worked with Vice President Biden and the Secretaries of Commerce, Labor, Education, many others, and looking across the country at what works in job training and how sort of federal programs could basically do that better. There is an enormous amount of good work being done. It's very hard work. It's very labor-intensive work. And a tremendous amount of initiative and energy and resources go to what might get 20 people placed, 30 people trained, right? These are some of the larger ones right here. And yet, when you have a program that works, it consists of, it's curriculum, it's information, okay? Like a lot of it is information. And you have people apply for 400 jobs, they learn nothing, right? They learn absolutely nothing about why they didn't get those jobs. Information loss is massive throughout the system. And if we want to take this problem, take this to scale, the idea that whatever is the best thing they come up with this platform in Nashville can be replicated right, across the country, and by the way, adapted and learned, and if, like with a Creative Commons license, if you improve it, you put it back in and people go, that is something that sort of people at this conference and, know how to do. And that the people who know how to do it and have the passion for this work and are willing, I see so many, you have jobs, but you're like, nights and weekends on this stuff. Like, that's actually what we need. This movement is kind of what we need to sort of translate the amazing technology that's being produced in the private sector and with the patience to take it all the way to the people who need it most, but have the least access to it, and to work with government and community-based organizations so that they can then distribute it, but that you have a platform. And so that my ask would be that this kind of movement figure out how to crack that problem, because if you do, then all this good work that these folks here do and around the country is just going to be, the impact of it would be multiplied manyfold. So that would be my ask. And thank you for participating, and look forward to working together.